He saved Apache Beauty's life, and now her tribe says she belongs to him by sacred tradition. The sun was slowly rising over the wide, open plains of the southwest. The warm golden light painted the landscape in shades of orange and red. Rocky hills stretched in the distance, and the sound of birds could be heard as they woke with the new day. In this quiet, beautiful place, a man named Daniel was traveling alone. He was a kind and courageous soul, someone who often found himself in the right place at the right time, even though he never expected it. He was exploring the region to learn more about the land and its people, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. Daniel had been walking along a narrow trail near a small creek when he noticed something unusual. There was a young woman sitting near the water, clearly in distress. Her clothes were torn and she looked weak and exhausted. As he got closer, he saw that she had a deep cut on her leg. She was bleeding and the pain was written all over her face. Without thinking twice, Daniel rushed toward her. He knelt down gently beside her and asked if she was all right. At first, she looked up at him with fear in her eyes, unsure if she could trust this stranger. But the pain and exhaustion in her expression made it clear she needed help. "Don't worry. I'm here to help you," Daniel said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. The young woman, whose name was Ayana, tried to speak, but the pain was too much. She had been injured while hunting with her tribe, and a sudden accident had left her alone and vulnerable in the wild. Her tribe was not far, but she had lost her way, and the injury made it impossible for her to walk. Daniel quickly examined the wound and realized it needed immediate attention. He tore a piece of cloth from his own shirt and carefully wrapped it around the bleeding cut, doing his best to stop the blood. Ayana winced and tried to pull away, but Daniel held her gently, speaking words of comfort to keep her calm. As he worked, Daniel noticed the strength in her eyes despite her pain. She was clearly someone brave, someone who had faced challenges before, and yet, at this moment, she had no choice but to trust a stranger. This realization made Daniel feel a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that saving her life was not just about tending to her wound, but also about making sure she felt safe and protected. He offered her water from his canteen and helped her drink carefully. Yana's hands were shaking and she could barely lift the canteen herself, but Daniel patiently guided her. Once her immediate injury was treated, Daniel helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. They began moving slowly along the trail, with Daniel carrying supplies and helping Yana whenever she faltered. He could see the worry in her eyes, not just for herself, but also for her tribe. She must have been thinking about how worried they would be by now. Daniel tried to reassure her that they would reach safety soon and that he would not leave her side. As they walked, Daniel asked gently, "Can you tell me where your tribe is? I want to make sure we get there safely." Yana hesitated, then pointed toward a distant hill where smoke was rising. "My people, they live over there," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and adjusted their pace, careful not to rush her but determined to get her back to her tribe. The journey was not easy. The rocky terrain was difficult to navigate, and the sun was growing hotter. Daniel kept a steady pace, offering words of encouragement and helping her step over rocks and obstacles. He noticed the way her small hands gripped his arm for support, and it reminded him how fragile life could be in the wilderness. Along the way, Daniel saw signs of the land's beauty. Birds flew overhead, and small flowers bloomed along the path. Yet despite the natural beauty around them, Daniel's mind was focused entirely on Yana and her safety. Every step required careful attention, and he remained alert for any dangers, whether from the rough terrain or wild animals. He spoke to Ayana quietly about the land, trying to keep her spirits up. She listened carefully, and he could see that she was beginning to trust him, slowly letting go of her initial fear. After several hours, they finally reached the edge of Ayana's village. The sight of her people brought tears to her eyes. She had been lost and hurt for so long, and now she could see the warmth and safety of her tribe. Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, and he felt a deep sense of relief. However, as they approached, members of the tribe began to notice them. There was a mixture of curiosity and caution on their faces. It was clear that outsiders were not common in this community, and Daniel could feel the weight of their gaze. An elder of the tribe, a wise and respected figure named Tayanita, stepped forward. He looked at Daniel carefully, his eyes studying every movement. Then he looked at Ayana, and a wave of understanding passed over him. "You have saved her," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Her life was in danger and you have brought her back to us." Daniel nodded, feeling both pride and humility. "I only did what I could," he replied. "She needed help and I could not leave her alone." The elder studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What you have done is more than just help. It is an act of courage and respect. In our tradition, saving a life is sacred. We will honor this." Daniel felt a mixture of surprise and respect. He had never imagined that a simple act of helping someone could carry such deep meaning. Gianna looked at him with gratitude in her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for saving me," she said. The tribe guided them back to the village, and Daniel stayed close to ensure she was fully safe. As night began to fall, the community offered food, water, and a place to rest. Daniel felt honored by their hospitality, but he also realized that something extraordinary had happened. A single act of bravery had connected him to a world he had only observed from a distance. He was not just a traveler anymore. He had become part of a story that was much bigger than himself. That evening, around a small fire, the tribe spoke of the sacred tradition that bound a rescuer to the one they saved. Daniel listened intently, realizing that his actions had more significance than he had ever imagined. Iana, though still recovering from her injury, watched him with a mix of curiosity and respect. It was a silent understanding that something important had begun, something that went beyond words, beyond culture, and beyond simple gratitude. Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. He had saved a life, but now he was part of a community that valued courage, honor, and tradition in ways he was only beginning to understand. As he sat by the fire, he looked at Ayana, then at the faces of her tribe, and felt a quiet determination. Whatever came next, he would face it with respect, courage, and a willingness to learn. The stars began to shine brightly above the desert plains. The firelight flickered across the faces of the tribe, casting shadows and revealing smiles. Daniel felt a deep connection to this moment, a bond formed not by chance, but by an act of bravery and a commitment to protect another human being. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that this was a story that would stay with him forever, a story of courage, respect, and the beginning of a bond that could change both their lives. The morning sun rose over the village, casting long shadows across the soft sand and rocky hills. Daniel awoke with a sense of anticipation and responsibility. Last night had been filled with conversations, quiet moments, and a profound sense of connection with the tribe. He had never imagined that helping someone in need could lead to such a meaningful experience. As he stepped outside, he saw Ayana sitting near a small stream, gently cleaning the wound on her leg with water and leaves. She looked stronger than the day before, though still cautious and thoughtful. Daniel approached her slowly, giving her space but showing that he was there for support. "Good morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling today?" Yana glanced up, a small smile forming on her lips. "Better, thanks to you," she replied. "I feel stronger." The tribe's elders soon gathered, calling Daniel to meet them in the central area of the village. He felt a mix of curiosity and nervousness. The previous night, the elders had spoken of the sacred tradition that bound a person who saved a life to the one they rescued. Daniel had listened carefully, wanting to understand and respect their customs. Now, he was about to learn more about what this bond truly meant. Elder Tayanita spoke first, his voice calm yet commanding. "Daniel," he said, "your actions yesterday have honored not only our tribe but the spirit of life itself. In our tradition, saving the life of a valued member creates a bond of responsibility, respect, and recognition. This is not a casual matter. It is sacred." Daniel listened intently, trying to absorb the weight of the words. He had acted out of instinct and compassion, never imagining that it could carry such cultural significance. I only wanted to help," he said humbly. "I didn't expect anything in return." The elder nodded. "And that is why your heart is true. But in our eyes, the bond is already formed. You are now connected to Ayana in a way that goes beyond simple friendship or gratitude. You have shown courage and care when it was needed most. That is the foundation of respect in our tribe." Ayana sat quietly, listening to the conversation. She felt a mixture of emotions, gratitude, curiosity, and a hint of uncertainty. The idea that a stranger could become a part of her life and her people's story was overwhelming. Yet there was a strange comfort in knowing that Daniel had risked everything to save her. She understood the sacred meaning of the tradition, but her heart and mind were still learning how to process it. Over the next few days, Daniel began to participate more actively in the daily life of the tribe. He helped with chores, assisted with food preparation, and learned about their customs and traditions. Every day, he observed how the tribe respected nature, family, and community. He admired the way they lived in harmony with their surroundings, taking only what was needed and giving thanks for every blessing. Shiana, too, was gradually opening up to Daniel. They shared quiet moments by the creek, walked together through the hills, and spoke about the land, the tribe, and their own experiences. She told him stories of her childhood, of the lessons her parents had taught her, and the responsibilities she carried as a valued member of her community. Daniel listened carefully, respecting her words and learning from her perspective. As their connection deepened, Daniel began to notice the subtle ways the tribe acknowledged his presence. Children would follow him with curious eyes, and adults would nod in respect when he passed. He realized that their acceptance was not simply because he had saved Ayana, but because he had shown humility, patience, and a willingness to learn. He was becoming a part of their story, and he felt honored by it. One afternoon, the tribe held a small gathering near a sacred rock formation on the edge of the village. Elder Tayanita addressed the community, speaking of the events that had brought Daniel and Ayana together. "This bond is a reminder that life is precious," he said. "It is also a reminder that courage and compassion can bridge worlds. Daniel has entered our lives not as an outsider, but as someone who has earned our respect." The tribe then performed a simple, symbolic ceremony. They offered Daniel a piece of cloth woven with the patterns of the tribe, a sign of recognition and connection. Daniel accepted it with humility, understanding that this gesture represented more than gratitude. It was a commitment to honor the bond created by his actions. Yana watched closely, her heart beating with a mix of awe and uncertainty. She had always respected the traditions of her people, but now she was experiencing them in a deeply personal way. The bond that Daniel had earned through his bravery was not just about life-saving. It was about trust, honor, and mutual respect. She realized that the man who had appeared as a stranger was becoming a meaningful part of her life. As days passed, Daniel continued to immerse himself in the tribe's daily life. He learned how to hunt and gather, how to prepare food, and how to understand the signs of nature. Gianna often guided him, showing patience and encouragement. In return, Daniel shared stories of his own life, of his travels and experiences outside the village. Through this exchange, they began to understand each other more deeply, not just as individuals but as members of a shared story. Despite the growing bond, challenges began to emerge. Some members of the tribe were curious about the depth of the connection, wondering how an outsider could fit into their traditions. Daniel himself struggled with the weight of the responsibility. He wanted to honor the sacred bond, but he also worried about overstepping boundaries. Yana, too, wrestled with her feelings. She respected her tribe's customs, but she was learning to navigate her own emotions about the man who had saved her life. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of red and purple, Daniel and Yana sat together near the fire. The sounds of the village were soft around them, children laughing, elders talking, and the wind rustling through the trees. "I am grateful for everything you've done," Yana said quietly. "Not just for saving me, but for staying here, for learning, and for respecting us." Daniel smiled gently. "I did what I could. I never expected to be a part of something so important, but I want to honor your people and you. I want to do what is right." Yana nodded, a small sense of relief passing through her. She realized that trust had grown between them, not just because of the life-saving act, but because of the way they treated each other with respect and care. It was a connection built on more than circumstance. It was built on understanding. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel began to feel fully integrated into the rhythm of the village. The sacred tradition that had initially seemed foreign now felt like a guiding principle for his actions. Every step he took, every word he spoke, was mindful of the bond he shared with Ayana and the trust he had earned from her tribe. Ayana, too, found herself appreciating Daniel's presence in ways she had not anticipated. He was no longer just the man who saved her life. He was a companion, a student of their ways, and someone whose heart aligned with the values of her people. The tribe began to see the depth of their connection. It was not simply an obligation of tradition, but a genuine bond of respect, courage, and mutual care. Elders would occasionally observe them, nodding with approval, knowing that the sacred tradition had been honored in spirit as well as action. Children watched quietly, learning an important lesson about bravery, compassion, and the value of helping others. One morning, Elder Tayanita approached Daniel with a serious expression. "You have shown patience, courage, and respect," he said. "These are the qualities that make a bond strong. But remember, this connection is a responsibility as much as it is an honor. The way you live your life from now on will reflect not just on you, but on the values of our tribe." Daniel nodded solemnly. "I understand. I will do my best to honor this bond in every way I can." Yana listened from nearby, feeling a sense of pride and reassurance. She had seen Daniel's actions, his care, and his humility, and she knew that the bond formed by the sacred tradition was genuine. It was no longer just about the life he had saved. It was about the way he had chosen to live with integrity and respect within their community. As part two of their story drew to a close, Daniel and Ayana had begun to navigate the complexities of tradition, trust, and connection. They were learning that true bonds are not only formed through acts of bravery, but through consistent respect, care, and understanding. The sacred tradition that had once seemed daunting was now a guiding force in their lives, teaching them about honor, responsibility, and the power of human connection. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold, both Daniel and Ayana felt a quiet sense of harmony. Their journey was just beginning, but the foundation of trust, respect, and shared experience had been firmly established. They had crossed the threshold from strangers to companions, connected not just by a life saved, but by a mutual recognition of courage, honor, and humanity. The days passed slowly but meaningfully for Daniel and Ayana. The rhythm of the village had become familiar, yet each day brought new lessons, challenges, and moments of quiet connection. Daniel woke each morning before the sun, helping gather water and firewood, tasks that initially felt foreign but soon became routines that connected him to the land and the people who lived on it. Yana would often accompany him, showing patience and care, her presence both comforting and motivating. It was in these small shared moments that a bond grew deeper, quietly but steadily, between them. One morning, Daniel noticed Ayana walking toward a rocky plateau on the edge of the village. She carried a basket filled with herbs, carefully gathered for medicine and daily needs. "Come with me," she said softly. "I want to show you something important." Daniel followed, curiosity rising. The path was steep and uneven, but she moved with ease and grace, a testament to years spent living in harmony with the land. When they reached the plateau, Ayana pointed toward a valley below. "This is where our ancestors walked," she said. "It is sacred ground. Many generations have lived here and the land holds their stories. We respect it because it teaches us about life, survival, and balance." Daniel looked down at the valley, feeling a mix of awe and humility. He realized that the beauty of the landscape was not just physical, it was deeply spiritual, intertwined with the tribe's history, traditions, and values. As they walked along the plateau, Ayana shared more about her people's customs. She spoke of the ways they celebrated life, honored the seasons, and cared for one another. Daniel listened intently, asking questions with respect, eager to understand. The more he learned, the more he appreciated the depth and wisdom of the tribe's way of life. He also began to see the subtle ways they observed and judged character. Patience, humility, courage, and respect were more important than strength or skill. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children laughing and running nearby. Daniel smiled as he watched them play, noticing how the adults allowed freedom yet maintained gentle guidance. The balance of independence and community responsibility struck him as remarkable. Gianna watched him watch them, a small smile appearing on her face. "You are learning quickly," she said softly. "That is good. It means you are not only saving lives with your actions but also with your heart." Daniel felt a warm sense of pride, though he kept his humility. "I am only trying to understand," he said. "You and your people have so much wisdom to share. I want to learn, not just to belong, but to respect the bond we share." Iana nodded, and in that silent agreement, a deeper trust formed. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued to integrate himself into the community. He helped with daily chores, assisted in preparing meals, and joined in hunting and gathering trips. Iana often guided him, correcting mistakes with patience and encouragement. They developed a rhythm together, one that allowed them to support each other without speaking every thought aloud. The villagers began to see the growing closeness between them, not as a disruption, but as a natural extension of the sacred bond that had been formed. One day, while gathering medicinal plants in the hills, a sudden storm approached. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and the wind whipped through the rocks with increasing force. Daniel and Ayana tried to return to the village, but the trail had become slippery and treacherous. They were forced to take shelter under a small overhang, holding each other steady as the rain poured down. Daniel could see the worry in Ayana's eyes, and he tightened his support, offering comfort through presence rather than words. "This is dangerous," Daniel said, raising his voice over the storm. "We need to be careful." Ayana nodded, gripping his arm tightly. "I know," she replied, "but we will get through it together." As the storm raged on, they shared a quiet moment of reflection. The danger reminded them both of the fragility of life, of the importance of trust, and of the bond that had brought them together. Daniel realized that the sacred tradition connecting them was more than symbolic. It was lived every day in choices, actions, and care for one another. Yana's presence reassured him, just as his steadiness reassured her. When the storm finally passed, the two emerged, wet and tired but stronger in their connection. They returned to the village, greeted by villagers who had been concerned but not surprised. The tribe respected the courage and resilience they both showed. Elder Tayanita approached them later, speaking with quiet authority. "You have faced nature's challenge together," he said. "This is how bonds are strengthened, not only through ceremonies but through action, through care, and through courage. You honor our tradition with your hearts. Daniel and Ayanna shared a brief look, understanding without words that their bond had deepened through shared trials. It was a connection built not only on gratitude and respect, but on the shared experience of facing difficulties together. As life in the village continued, Daniel and Ayanna found themselves sharing more personal stories. Around the evening fire, they spoke of childhood memories, dreams for the future, and fears they had never voiced aloud. Daniel shared tales of his travels, the landscapes he had seen, and the people he had met. Yana listened with fascination, occasionally asking questions, while also sharing the rich history of her tribe, the lessons taught by elders, and the customs that had guided her life. Through these conversations, their friendship blossomed into a bond that combined admiration, respect, and the beginnings of deeper emotional connection. Daniel noticed how thoughtful Ayanna was, her intelligence and kindness shining in every word and gesture. Ayanna noticed Daniel's patience, courage, and genuine respect for her people. It was clear that the bond between them was not simply a matter of tradition. It was also an authentic human connection. However, as their bond grew stronger, they faced new challenges. Some villagers whispered questions about how an outsider could truly belong. Daniel himself struggled with feelings of uncertainty, wondering if he was doing enough to honor the sacred tradition. Yana felt the weight of expectation as well, knowing that her community watched carefully, judging her choices and emotions. Despite these challenges, they remained committed to each other, guided by mutual respect and understanding. One day, Daniel accompanied Ayanna to teach a group of younger girls how to identify medicinal plants. He noticed their admiration for both her knowledge and his willingness to learn. It was a small moment, but it symbolized how trust and respect could extend beyond their immediate bond, influencing others and bridging worlds. Yana smiled as she saw Daniel patiently explaining the uses of each plant, his voice steady and sincere. "You are learning not just for yourself," she said softly, "but for all of us." Daniel realized the truth in her words. His presence in the village was more than personal. It was a living example of how courage, care, and respect could bridge differences. He began to understand the full meaning of the sacred bond. It was not ownership but responsibility, not possession but honor. Every act, every word, every decision mattered because they reflected not only on him, but on the lives he had touched. As weeks turned into months, Daniel and Ayanna's relationship matured. They faced small and large challenges together, from tending to injured animals to helping villagers during difficult weather. Each moment strengthened their connection, building trust and reliance. It was clear to everyone that the bond between them was genuine, founded not only on the life Daniel had saved, but on daily acts of care, respect, and courage. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of gold and purple, Daniel and Ayanna sat together on a small hill overlooking the village. The wind was gentle, carrying the scents of the land and the soft sounds of the community settling for the night. "I never imagined my life would be like this," Daniel said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. Ayanna looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Neither did I," she replied, "but I am grateful. You have shown me that kindness and courage can create connections stronger than fear or doubt. You honor our people and our traditions with your heart." Daniel reached out, taking her hand gently. "And you have taught me the importance of respect, patience, and understanding. I am lucky to be here with you, learning and growing together." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of the land and the warmth of the village, they understood that their bond was no longer just a matter of tradition. It was lived every day through care, courage, and shared experiences. It was a connection that transcended words, rooted in respect, gratitude, and trust. And as the stars began to twinkle above the hills, Daniel and Ayanna felt a quiet certainty. Their journey together was far from over. Challenges would come, as they always do in life, but the foundation of their relationship was strong. They had learned from each other, faced difficulties together, and honored the sacred bond in every meaningful way. It was a connection that would guide them forward, shaping their lives and the community around them for years to come. The early morning air was cool and crisp as Daniel and Ayana walked through the village. Life had grown into a rhythm, but a quiet tension had begun to appear. While most of the tribe had accepted Daniel and recognized the bond formed through the sacred tradition, some villagers whispered among themselves, questioning how a stranger could be so closely connected to one of their own. It was subtle, but Daniel noticed the glances, the pauses in conversation, and the careful words of some elders who had not yet fully embraced him. Daniel had always been aware that he was an outsider, but he had never anticipated the depth of scrutiny that came with living among a close-knit community. Iana seemed to sense his unease. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and said softly, "Don't let their words worry you. You have done what is right and your heart has honored the tradition. That is what matters." He nodded, though the worry lingered. He had come to deeply respect Ayana's people, their culture, and their way of life, and he feared that any mistake on his part could not only harm his relationship with the tribe, but also with Ayana. He wanted to honor their traditions fully, yet he was aware that some of their ways were unfamiliar and challenging. One day, a visiting group of traders arrived at the village. They brought news from other communities and offered goods for trade. While most villagers welcomed them, some members expressed concern about outsiders bringing influences that could disrupt their traditions. Daniel's presence was quietly scrutinized, and whispers circulated about whether an outsider should have such an important role in the tribe's life. That evening, Elder Tayanita called Daniel aside. The elder's expression was serious, reflecting the weight of the matter. "Daniel," he began, "your bond with Ayana is recognized, but some voices question it. They do not yet understand your place here. You must prove that your intentions are pure and that you respect our traditions fully. The sacred bond is not only about bravery, it is about honor, patience, and consistency." Daniel listened carefully, understanding the responsibility placed upon him. "I understand," he said humbly. "I will do whatever I can to honor the bond and your traditions. I only wish to be worthy of the trust you and Ayana have given me." Ayana had overheard part of the conversation and approached Daniel afterward. "It is not easy being the one who stands outside," she said quietly, "but your actions speak louder than words. You must continue to show respect and patience. That will earn their trust, not arguments or explanations." Despite their shared determination, challenges continued to arise. One afternoon, while helping gather firewood, Daniel and Ayana encountered a small accident. A log shifted unexpectedly, and Daniel instinctively caught Ayana before she could fall. While no one was hurt, the incident sparked discussion among some villagers about the closeness of their relationship. Though well-intentioned, Daniel felt the weight of these judgments and began to reflect deeply on what it meant to truly respect the tribe's culture while maintaining their growing bond. Ayana noticed his concern. "Daniel," she said, "your heart is pure and you have proven courage and respect every day. But you must also remember that some people take time to understand. This is their way, not a rejection of you. Patience is part of the bond just as much as action and care." The couple faced another challenge when neighboring tribes approached with questions and minor disputes about territory and resources. While the conflicts were peaceful, they required careful diplomacy. Daniel's perspective as an outsider was sometimes met with skepticism, and he realized that even his best intentions could be misunderstood. Jana guided him, explaining the proper ways to communicate, the importance of listening, and the need to approach every interaction with humility and respect. Through these trials, Daniel and Ayana's bond strengthened. Each challenge taught them something about trust, patience, and understanding. They realized that the sacred tradition connecting them was not just a symbolic gesture, but a living commitment, one that required daily care, thoughtfulness, and a willingness to navigate difficult situations together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the village, Daniel and Ayana sat together by the creek. The events of the day weighed heavily on their minds. "Sometimes I worry," Daniel said, his voice quiet. "I want to honor this bond, but I fear making mistakes or offending the tribe. I don't want to fail them, or you." Gianna reached out and took his hand. "You have already proven yourself more than many could," she said. "This bond is about courage, yes, but also about respect and learning. Mistakes happen, and the way you respond shows your heart. That is what matters most." Her words comforted him, and he realized that the challenges they faced were part of the journey. Bonds, he understood now, were not only strengthened by ease and joy, but also by trials and conflicts. Facing difficulties together allowed them to understand each other better and to grow closer in ways that calm moments alone could not create. As days passed, Daniel began to actively help mediate minor conflicts within the village. He listened carefully to both sides, offered suggestions respectfully, and deferred to the elders when necessary. Slowly, villagers began to recognize his sincerity and his dedication to the community. Even those who had once doubted his place began to acknowledge that his presence was beneficial, not disruptive. Gianna watched with quiet pride as Daniel navigated these challenges. She saw how he carefully balanced the sacred tradition, their personal bond, and the expectations of the tribe. It was clear that his commitment went beyond simple obligation. He had embraced the values of the community in his heart, not just in action. Despite the progress, tensions occasionally resurfaced. Some elders reminded Daniel that the bond he shared with Ayana was sacred, but also required humility and vigilance. "Respect is not earned once," Elder Tayanita said. "It is renewed every day through thought, action, and care. Your bond must reflect the spirit of the tradition, not just the act of saving a life." Daniel took these words seriously. Each day, he made a conscious effort to listen, observe, and act with care. He sought advice from Ayana, learning how to interpret subtle signals, understand unspoken expectations, and honor the tribe's customs in every decision. Ayana, in turn, appreciated his dedication, knowing that true respect required effort, patience, and a willingness to learn. The shared experiences brought them even closer. During a quiet afternoon, they helped repair a small shelter damaged by a recent storm. Working side by side, Daniel and Ayana moved logs, secured ropes, and lifted beams, coordinating without words, relying on intuition and trust. It was a simple act, but it reflected the depth of their growing connection, not just as friends or companions, but as partners in navigating life's challenges together. That evening, the tribe gathered for a communal meal. Daniel and Ayana sat together, surrounded by villagers who now spoke more openly with them. Conversations were lively, filled with stories, laughter, and the sharing of wisdom. Daniel felt a sense of belonging that had once seemed impossible. The sacred bond had not removed the challenges, but it had guided them through, teaching patience, resilience, and the value of trust. As the night fell, Daniel and Ayana walked to the edge of the village, looking out at the hills and plains bathed in moonlight. "We have faced so many challenges," Daniel said quietly, "but I feel stronger knowing we face them together." Ayana smiled, her eyes reflecting the light of the moon. "Challenges will always come," she said, "but the bond we share is not weakened by difficulty. It grows stronger just as we grow stronger together." In that moment, Daniel understood the full meaning of the sacred tradition. It was not merely a recognition of a life saved. It was a living, evolving connection built on respect, trust, and shared experience. The trials they faced were part of the journey, shaping their bond and guiding their choices. As part 4 drew to a close, Daniel and Ayanna had learned that true connection required courage, patience, and humility. The sacred bond that had begun with a single act of bravery was now a complex living relationship, tested by challenges, strengthened by care, and honored through consistent action. They were no longer just a rescuer and the rescued. They were partners navigating the balance between tradition, personal choice, and the evolving life of their community. And as the stars appeared above the desert plains, shining brightly in the clear night sky, Daniel and Ayanna felt a quiet confidence. The path ahead would not always be easy, but their bond, forged through courage, respect, and shared experience, would guide them through every challenge, every moment, and every decision yet to come. The morning sun rose gently over the village, casting its warm glow across the plains and hills. Life had begun to settle into a steady rhythm, yet there was a quiet excitement in the air. Daniel and Ayanna had faced many challenges together, learned the ways of the tribe, and strengthened their bond through shared experiences. The sacred tradition that had first brought them together had grown into something living, meaningful, and deeply respected. Today felt different. It was a day of celebration, acknowledgement, and understanding. Daniel awoke early, the crisp air filling his lungs, and felt a sense of calm he had rarely experienced in his life. He looked toward the hills where the sun touched the rocky outcrops and thought about how far they had come. The bond he shared with Ayanna was no longer defined only by the life he had saved, but by every act of care, patience, and respect that had followed. He had learned that true connection required constant effort and mindfulness, and he was ready to honor that in every possible way. Ayanna was already awake, gathering herbs near the stream. She looked calm and serene, yet her eyes held a sparkle of anticipation. She had also spent these weeks reflecting on what the sacred bond meant, not just in terms of tradition, but in the way it shaped their lives and their relationship. Together, they had faced storms, cultural misunderstandings, and the careful scrutiny of the tribe. Through it all, they had learned to trust each other, to communicate without words at times, and to respect the traditions that had guided her people for generations. The village elders called a gathering in the central area of the community. Villagers assembled around the ceremonial circle, their faces reflecting curiosity, respect, and a sense of shared purpose. Elder Tayanita stepped forward, his expression calm but filled with authority. "Today, we honor the bond that has grown between Daniel and Ayanna," he began. "It is a bond that was born from courage, tested by trials, and strengthened by patience, care, and understanding. This bond reflects not only the sacred tradition but also the human spirit, the ability to connect, to respect, and to grow together." Daniel stood beside Ayanna, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. He had not sought recognition or acknowledgement. His only intention had been to help, to act with care, and to honor the trust given to him by Ayanna and her people. Yet, hearing the elders' words, he realized that the journey they had shared had touched not only their lives but also the community around them. The elder continued, "In our tradition, the bond between a rescuer and the one saved is sacred. But it is not a bond of ownership. It is a bond of responsibility, respect, and shared life. Daniel has shown that he honors this bond in every action, every word, and every choice. For this, we recognize him not as an outsider, but as part of our story, our community, and our future." A gentle cheer rose from the villagers, a mixture of approval and celebration. Children ran to Daniel, curious and playful, while adults nodded with quiet satisfaction. The recognition was not merely symbolic. It reflected the trust and respect that had been built through weeks of effort, courage, and care. Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude. He looked at Ayanna, who stood beside him with a soft smile, and understood that their connection had become part of the fabric of the community. After the formal acknowledgement, the villagers invited Daniel and Ayanna to participate in a ceremonial meal. The food was simple but prepared with care, representing the bounty of the land and the traditions of the tribe. As they ate together, Daniel observed the interactions around him, the smiles, the laughter, and the shared sense of belonging. It was clear that the sacred bond had not only affected them personally, but had also influenced the way the village viewed connection, trust, and respect. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Ayanna walked together to the plateau overlooking the valley. It had been a place of learning, reflection, and shared stories, and now it felt like a symbol of their journey. The sun was low in the sky, painting the hills with warm shades of gold and red. They sat quietly, letting the silence speak between them, a silence filled with understanding, appreciation, and the calm satisfaction of a bond tested and strengthened. "I never imagined life could bring me here," Daniel said quietly, his voice thoughtful. "I came as a stranger, and now I feel connected in a way I could never have imagined." Yana turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the light of the sunset and a deep sense of understanding. "And I never imagined that someone from outside our world could become such an important part of it. You have shown courage, patience, and respect every day. That is why the bond is not only recognized but honored." They spoke of their journey, the moments of fear, the storms they had faced, the lessons learned, and the quiet moments of care that had built trust. Each memory was a thread woven into the fabric of their connection, a bond that had grown stronger with every challenge overcome, and every choice made with consideration for each other and the community. As they returned to the village, the night began to fall. The stars appeared one by one, twinkling above the desert plains, and the air was filled with the calm sounds of the village settling for the night. Daniel and Ayanna joined the elders near the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and reflections on the day. The atmosphere was warm and harmonious, a testament to the trust and respect that had been cultivated over time. Elder Tayanita spoke again, this time more softly, addressing both Daniel and Ayanna. "Remember," he said, "the bond you share is sacred, but it is also a living connection. It must be nurtured through every action, every word, and every choice. Honor it with humility, care, and courage. That is how it will continue to grow and guide you." Daniel listened intently, understanding that this was not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a new phase. The sacred bond was no longer only about the act of saving a life. It was about responsibility, understanding, and the ongoing effort to live with respect, integrity, and compassion. Yana's presence beside him reminded him that they would face every challenge together, supporting one another while honoring the values and traditions of her people. In the following days, the village continued its routine, but there was a sense of harmony and connection that had deepened since the events that had brought Daniel into their lives. He worked alongside Ayanna and other villagers, learning more about the land, the animals, and the practices that had sustained her people for generations. He shared his knowledge when appropriate, always mindful of the customs, and every action reflected the respect he had learned to carry. Ayanna noticed subtle changes in the way others treated them both. Villagers who had once questioned Daniel's presence now approached him with quiet trust and openness. Children sought his guidance in small tasks, adults invited him to participate in discussions, and the elders observed with satisfaction the way he embraced the values of the community. It was a reflection of both his actions and the integrity of the bond he shared with Ayanna. One evening, as the village gathered for a small celebration, Daniel and Ayanna stood together, watching the dances and listening to the songs that told the stories of generations past. The rhythms, the movements, and the stories reminded them both of the continuity of life, the importance of tradition, and the ways in which courage and respect could bridge differences. Daniel realized that his journey had not only saved a life, but had also brought him into a world rich with wisdom, history, and shared human values. After the celebration, they walked to the edge of the village, looking at the stars that stretched across the sky. "We have come so far," Daniel said softly, "not just in distance but in understanding, in connection, and in trust." Yana nodded. "And we will continue to grow," she replied. "The bond is living and it will guide us through every challenge. We have learned to respect, to trust, and to care, not just for each other but for the community that has accepted us both." In that moment, they understood the fullness of the sacred tradition. It was not a bond of ownership or expectation, but a connection built on courage, respect, and consistent care. It had begun with an act of bravery, been tested by trials and challenges, and had grown into a meaningful, living relationship that guided their lives. As they returned to the village, hand in hand, they felt a sense of peace and purpose. The sacred bond had been honored in every meaningful way, and their connection reflected not only their personal journey, but also the values of the tribe and the lessons of life itself. Daniel and Ayana had faced storms, challenges, and cultural differences, but through every step, they had remained committed to respect, understanding, and care. The tribe had embraced them, not just as individuals but as a symbol of courage, connection, and the power of human compassion. And as the moon rose over the desert hills, casting its gentle light on the village, Daniel and Ayana knew that their story was not the end. It was a beginning. A beginning filled with respect, harmony, and the quiet certainty that courage, patience, and care could transform lives, create deep bonds, and guide them forward together. The sacred tradition had been honored. The bond had been lived. And the lives of Daniel, Ayana, and the tribe had been forever enriched by the courage, trust, and compassion that had brought them together.